I'm Jessica Miller. I'm 29, and until that moment in my parents' driveway on Christmas morning, my family genuinely believed I was the biggest disappointment in 3 generations. My brother-in-law Mark had just stepped outside to grab something from his BMW when he froze mid-step, staring at the sleek white Model S parked next to his car. The confusion on his face was priceless as he called back toward the house, his voice carrying that particular tone of disbelief. "Hey Jess, is that your Tesla? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The entire family conversation inside came to a dead stop. Through the window, I could see my sister Rachel's face contorting into that familiar expression she got when something didn't fit her neat little worldview. My parents looked like they'd just been told aliens had landed in their front yard, and my younger brother Tyler actually dropped his coffee mug, sending ceramic shards skittering across the hardwood floor. For 5 years, they'd watched me trudge through what they assumed was a failing life. The girl who worked at a coffee shop, lived in a tiny apartment, and never seemed to have money for the family vacations or fancy dinners they constantly planned. They'd gotten so comfortable pitying me, making excuses for my absence at their expensive gatherings, and whispering about how I just hadn't found my way yet, that they'd never bothered to look closer. But sometimes the people who think they know you best are the ones who know you least. And sometimes the biggest surprise isn't what you've been hiding, but how blind love can make a family when they've already decided who you are. Christmas morning had started exactly like every other family gathering for the past 5 years. I'd taken the Max Light Rail from my apartment in southeast Portland to my parents' house in Beaverton, carrying a small bag of modestly wrapped presents that I'd carefully budgeted to look appropriate but not extravagant. The routine was always the same. Arrive quietly, deflect questions about my life with vague answers, listen to everyone else's success stories, and leave early with a headache and a heavy heart. My sister Rachel had been holding court in the living room since I arrived, detailing her latest promotion at the marketing firm where she'd climbed to senior director. She spoke with the animated confidence of someone who'd never doubted their place in the world, gesturing with perfectly manicured nails as she described the corporate retreat in Cabo and the new Mercedes she was considering. Mark nodded along proudly, occasionally jumping in with his own stories about closing major deals at the investment bank where he worked downtown. Meanwhile, Tyler was showing off photos from his European backpacking trip, funded entirely by our parents, while Stephanie, his girlfriend of 6 months, admired the expensive watch he'd gotten her for Christmas. The conversation flowed around achievements and acquisitions, each story a building block in the monument of their collective success. I sat in the corner of the sectional sofa, the same spot I'd occupied at every family gathering, nursing a cup of coffee and offering appropriate "wow" and "that's amazing" responses when the conversation required my participation. It wasn't that I felt bitter about their success, exactly. I was genuinely happy that Rachel had found her groove in marketing and that Tyler was discovering himself. But being the perpetual audience to everyone else's highlight reel, while being viewed as the family's cautionary tale, had worn me down over the years. My mom, Linda, had perfected the art of the sympathetic sideways glance. Every few minutes during Rachel's stories, she'd look over at me with that expression that managed to convey both pity and disappointment simultaneously. It was the same look she'd been giving me since I dropped out of the business program at Portland State 5 years ago. A decision that had caused 3 months of tense family dinners and hushed phone conversations about where they'd gone wrong with me. The dropping out had been the final straw for them. Here was Rachel, graduating summa cum laude and immediately landing a position at a prestigious firm. And Tyler, who despite being younger was already showing promise in his computer science program. Then there was me, walking away from education altogether to work at a coffee shop and pursue what my dad Bob called some vague entrepreneurial nonsense that would never pay the bills. They weren't entirely wrong about the coffee shop part. I did work at Grind Coffee on Hawthorne Boulevard, pulling espresso shots and perfecting latte art for the steady stream of Portland's caffeinated masses. What they didn't know was that I'd been using the coffee shop as my cover story for 5 years, a perfectly believable explanation for my modest lifestyle that kept them from asking too many probing questions about how I actually spent my time. The truth was, I'd bought into Grind Coffee 18 months after I started working there. Not as an employee, but as the owner. The previous owner, an aging hippie named Frank who'd been running the place since the 90s, had been looking to retire and move to Costa Rica. When he mentioned he was considering selling, I'd already been developing my real business on the side, and I had the capital to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. But my family saw what they expected to see. Their youngest daughter, struggling to make ends meet, clinging to a job that barely paid rent, living in a cramped apartment and taking public transportation because she couldn't afford a car. They'd constructed this narrative so thoroughly that they'd stopped asking questions years ago, assuming they already knew all the answers. The apartment was real, though it wasn't exactly what they imagined. Yes, it was small, and yes, I'd furnished it primarily with thrift store finds and hand-me-downs. But it was small by choice, not necessity. I'd learned early in my business development that the appearance of struggle was my greatest asset. Nobody asks too many questions about someone who appears to be barely getting by, and nobody expects too much from someone they've already written off. My real office was 15 minutes away in a converted warehouse in North Portland's industrial district, where I ran Miller Logistics, an e-commerce fulfillment company that had grown from a side hustle into a multi-million-dollar operation. What had started as me helping small online retailers store and ship their products had evolved into contracts with major brands who needed flexible, efficient distribution networks. The business had taken off faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Portland's location made it perfect for West Coast distribution, and the city's entrepreneurial culture meant there was no shortage of growing companies that needed exactly what I was offering. Within 3 years, I'd expanded from my original small warehouse space to 3 separate facilities, employing 42 people and handling fulfillment for everything from artisanal soap companies to major outdoor gear brands. But success in logistics isn't glamorous in the way my family understood success. There were no corner offices or business suits, no company cars or expense account dinners. My work involved spreadsheets and inventory management, negotiating with shipping companies, and optimizing warehouse layouts. It was the kind of behind-the-scenes operation that kept the modern economy running, but never made headlines or impressed people at cocktail parties. More importantly, it was the kind of business that allowed me to accumulate serious wealth while maintaining a completely ordinary public profile. My clients paid invoices electronically, my employees handled day-to-day operations, and my accountant David Rodriguez managed the financial complexity while I maintained the appearance of someone who counted tips at the end of each coffee shop shift. The Tesla had been my one indulgence, purchased 18 months earlier when Miller Logistics had landed its biggest contract yet with a major outdoor clothing company. I'd walked into the dealership in Tigard on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, expecting to browse and maybe put myself on a waiting list. But when Monica Parker, the sales representative, showed me the Model S and explained the immediate availability, something in me decided it was time to own something that reflected what I'd actually accomplished. I'd paid cash, all $85,000, and driven it off the lot the same day. But instead of parking it at my apartment, where my neighbors might see it, or heaven forbid, driving it to family gatherings where questions would arise, I kept it in a private garage downtown, near my real office. When I needed to visit my family, I took public transportation, maintaining the careful fiction that had protected my privacy for years. The garage had become my sanctuary, a place where I could sit in my car and remember who I actually was versus who my family thought I was. Sometimes I'd drive up to Mount Hood just to think, windows down, music up, feeling the acceleration that represented everything I'd built while everyone assumed I was falling behind. Living the double life had started as a practical decision, but had evolved into something more complex. There was a strange comfort in being underestimated, a freedom in having no expectations placed on your shoulders. When everyone assumes you're struggling, they stop asking for loans or expecting expensive gifts. When they think you're barely making rent, they don't invite you to costly group vacations that would strain a coffee shop worker's budget. The low expectations had become a protective barrier that allowed me to build something significant, without family input, criticism, or interference. But the isolation was real too. Sitting in that living room, listening to Rachel detail her latest work triumph, while my parents nodded with obvious pride, I sometimes wondered what it would feel like to share even a fraction of what I'd accomplished. To see that same pride in their eyes when they looked at me, To have them understand that their quiet daughter had built something substantial while they weren't paying attention. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment when Mark spotted the Tesla in the driveway, everything I'd carefully constructed over 5 years was about to unravel. But as I sat there, watching the confusion spread across my family's faces, I realized I wasn't scared. I was ready. The coffee mug Tyler had dropped was still in pieces on the floor, and nobody had moved to clean it up. My father had stood up from his recliner and was walking toward the window, craning his neck to get a better view of the driveway. Rachel had gone completely silent for the first time all morning, and my mother was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like she was looking at a stranger. Mark came back through the front door, his face flushed with cold air and confusion. He looked directly at me and asked again, more slowly this time. "Jess, is that really your car out there?" The room was so quiet, I could hear the Christmas tree lights humming in the corner. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for an explanation that would make sense of what they were seeing. For 5 years, I'd deflected questions and kept secrets, but sitting there in that moment, I realized I was tired of being invisible in my own family. I took a sip of my coffee, set the mug down carefully on the side table, and smiled. "Yeah, Mark, that's my Tesla." The silence that followed my confirmation stretched for what felt like an hour but was probably only 15 seconds. I could see the mental calculations happening behind each pair of eyes, everyone trying to reconcile the Jessica they thought they knew with the Jessica who apparently owned an $85,000 luxury electric vehicle. Rachel was the first to recover, though her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "Jess, that's not possible. That car costs more than most people make in a year. How could you possibly afford something like that working at a coffee shop?" The question hung in the air like smoke, and I could see my parents exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their confusion and concern. Tyler had finally moved to sweep up the broken mug, but he was doing it slowly, clearly more interested in hearing my answer than in cleaning up his mess. Mark was still standing by the front door, looking back and forth between me and the window, as if the car might disappear if he stopped watching it. His investment banker brain was probably running calculations about monthly payments, down payments, and debt-to-income ratios, trying to make the math work with what he knew about my supposed financial situation. "Maybe it's not actually yours," my mother suggested gently, her voice carrying that careful tone she used when she was trying to protect someone's feelings. "Maybe you're borrowing it from a friend, or it's a work car from the coffee shop." The suggestion was so absurd that I almost laughed. Linda Miller had clearly never spent much time thinking about the business model of independent coffee shops, if she thought Grind Coffee was providing luxury vehicles to its employees. But her question revealed something deeper about how my family saw me. They would rather believe in an implausible explanation than accept that I might have succeeded in ways they hadn't anticipated. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "It's mine. I bought it 18 months ago." Bob had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he leaned forward in his recliner, fixing me with the same stern look he'd used during my teenage years when he suspected I was hiding something significant. "Jessica, I need you to be straight with us here. Are you in some kind of trouble? Did you take out loans you can't afford? Because if you're in debt up to your eyeballs trying to keep up appearances, we need to know about it now." The concern in his voice was genuine, and I felt a pang of guilt for the years of worry I'd apparently caused by letting them believe I was struggling financially. But his assumption that I must be in financial trouble rather than financial success said everything about how thoroughly they'd written off my capabilities. "I'm not in debt, Dad," I replied. "I paid cash for it." This statement landed like a bomb in the middle of the Christmas morning celebration. Stephanie actually gasped audibly, and Tyler stopped pretending to clean up ceramic pieces altogether. Rachel's mouth opened and closed several times without producing any sound, like a fish trying to breathe air. Mark's professional instincts kicked in, and he moved into the interrogation mode I'd heard him use during conference calls when he thought someone was trying to mislead him about their financial position. "Jess, I don't mean to be rude, but that doesn't make sense. You work at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland. Even if you saved every penny you made, which would be impossible because you have to pay rent and buy food, it would take years to accumulate that kind of cash. And that's assuming you never spent money on anything else, which obviously isn't realistic. His tone was becoming increasingly condescending, and I could see Rachel nodding along with his analysis. They were tag-teaming me now, using their professional expertise to demonstrate why my claim was mathematically impossible. It was exactly the kind of dismissive behavior that had driven me to keep my real life hidden from them in the first place. Unless, Mark continued, his voice taking on a darker edge, you're involved in something illegal. Because honestly, that's the only way this makes sense. The accusation hit the room like a physical force. My mother's hand flew to her chest and my father's face went pale. Tyler looked genuinely shocked, while Stephanie seemed torn between fascination and horror at the family drama unfolding around her. But it was Rachel's reaction that cut the deepest. Instead of defending me or expressing disbelief at Mark's suggestion, she was nodding thoughtfully, as if the idea of me being involved in criminal activity was more plausible than the idea of me being successful through legitimate means. Mark might have a point, she said slowly. I mean, you've always been secretive about your life, Jess. You never talk about what you're really doing, you never have money for family things, but now suddenly you own a Tesla? It does seem suspicious. The betrayal in her words was breathtaking. This was my sister, the person who had known me longest after our parents, and she was more willing to believe I was a criminal than to consider that she might have misjudged my circumstances. The years of being dismissed and overlooked had apparently convinced them that dramatic failure or dramatic criminality were more likely explanations for my behavior than simple, quiet success. I stood up from the couch, feeling a strange calm settle over me. For 5 years, I had been carefully managing their perceptions, protecting their feelings by allowing them to think whatever made them comfortable about my life. But sitting there, listening to my own family speculate about my involvement in illegal activities, rather than acknowledge that I might have accomplished something significant, I realized that my good intentions had created a monster. You think I'm a drug dealer? I said quietly. It wasn't a question. We don't know what to think, my mother said, tears starting to form in her eyes. This is all so confusing, honey. Can you please just explain what's going on? The plea in her voice was genuine, but it was also 5 years too late. 5 years of Christmas mornings where they'd talked around me rather than to me. 5 years of family gatherings where my life was treated as an afterthought or a source of quiet concern. 5 years of being the family's charity case, the one who needed extra patience and lower expectations. What's going on? I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning in my chest. Is that you all decided a long time ago who I was and what I was capable of, and rather than challenge those assumptions, you'd prefer to believe I'm involved in criminal activity than consider that you might have been wrong about me. Mark scoffed. Come on, Jess. You have to admit this looks weird. You live in a tiny apartment, you work at a coffee shop, you take the bus everywhere, and you never have money for anything. But somehow you have enough cash lying around to buy a luxury car? That doesn't add up. His dismissal was the final straw. Every emotion I'd been carefully controlling for years suddenly surged to the surface, and I felt my composure crack. You're right, Mark, I said, my voice rising. It doesn't add up. Because you don't actually know anything about my life. None of you do. You stopped asking real questions about what I was doing years ago because you were comfortable with your narrative about poor Jessica who couldn't get her act together. Rachel stood up now too, her face flushing with anger. That's not fair, Jess. We've always supported you. We've always been here for you. Supported me how? I shot back. By assuming I was failing. By making excuses for why I couldn't afford to join your expensive family activities. By talking about me in whispers when you thought I couldn't hear. That's not support, Rachel. That's pity. The room erupted into overlapping voices as everyone tried to defend themselves and demand explanations simultaneously. Tyler was insisting that he'd never pitied me, while Stephanie awkwardly tried to fade into the background of a family fight she'd walked into. My parents were attempting to restore order while also expressing their hurt that I'd apparently been lying to them for years. But through all the chaos, Mark's voice cut through the noise with the kind of sharp clarity that made him successful in high-pressure business negotiations. Enough, he said loudly. This is all very emotional, but we're getting off track. Jess, if you want us to believe that you legitimately own that car, then prove it. Show us how you earned the money. Show us bank statements, pay stubs, tax returns. Show us something concrete instead of just getting angry when we ask reasonable questions. His challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down in the middle of the living room. Everyone turned to look at me, waiting to see how I would respond to this demand for evidence. I could see the expectation in their eyes that I would crumble under this pressure, that I would admit to some kind of deception or reveal the criminal activity they were all apparently convinced must be the real explanation. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. The move was so calm and deliberate that it seemed to surprise them more than if I had started screaming. I opened my banking app, entered my PIN, and held the screen toward Mark. "Here's my checking account balance," I said quietly. Mark leaned forward to look at the screen, and I watched his face go through a series of expressions as he processed what he was seeing. His eyebrows shot up, his mouth fell open slightly, and he blinked several times as if trying to clear his vision. "That can't be right," he whispered. "What does it say?" Rachel demanded, moving closer to try to see the screen. Mark's voice was barely audible when he answered. $2.7 million. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Tyler dropped the dustpan he'd been holding, sending ceramic pieces scattering across the floor again. Stephanie made a small choking sound. My parents both sat down heavily, as if their legs had suddenly stopped working. But it was Rachel's reaction that I found most telling. Instead of surprise or confusion, her face showed something that looked almost like anger, as if my financial success was somehow a personal attack on her. "That's impossible," she said flatly. "People don't just have millions of dollars sitting in checking accounts. That has to be fake. You can fake bank apps now, right? It's probably some kind of joke." Her desperate need to dismiss what she was seeing revealed everything about how threatened she felt by this revelation. Rachel had built her identity around being the successful sister, the one who had figured out how to navigate the adult world while I floundered behind. The idea that I might not only be successful but dramatically more successful than she was seemed to be causing her genuine psychological distress. Mark, however, was approaching this from a different angle. His banker's training had kicked in, and he was studying my phone screen with professional interest rather than personal emotion. "Can I see your investment accounts?" he asked quietly. I swiped to a different app and showed him the portfolio summary. This number was even larger, representing years of careful investment guided by my financial advisor, who had helped me diversify the profits from Miller Logistics into a balanced mix of stocks, bonds, and real estate investments. Mark's professional composure finally cracked completely. "Holy shit, Jess. You're worth over $8 million. The profanity shocked my mother more than the number itself, but the figure settled over the room like a heavy blanket. $8 million was more money than any of them had ever imagined having. It was more money than Mark would accumulate in his entire career, more money than Rachel's marketing firm generated in annual revenue, more money than my parents had earned in their combined lifetimes. "Where did this come from?" my father asked, his voice hollow with shock. This was the question I'd been preparing for, consciously or unconsciously, for 5 years. The moment when I would finally have to explain not just what I'd been doing, but why I'd been hiding it from the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally. "I own a business," I said simply. "Miller Logistics. We handle e-commerce fulfillment for companies all over the West Coast. I started it 5 years ago, and it's grown faster than I ever expected." The explanation was met with blank stares, as if I'd started speaking a foreign language. The concept of e-commerce fulfillment was apparently outside their frame of reference, despite the fact that they all regularly ordered products online and benefited from exactly the kind of services my company provided. "What does that mean?" Tyler asked, apparently the first to recover enough to form a coherent question. "It means when you order something from an online store, there's a good chance it ships from one of my warehouses," I explained. "Companies pay me to store their products and handle the shipping when customers place orders. I manage the inventory, pick and pack the orders, coordinate with shipping companies, and handle returns and exchanges." Rachel was shaking her head slowly, as if trying to physically reject the information I was providing. "That doesn't sound like something that would make millions of dollars." Her skepticism was understandable. Most people had no idea how much money moved through the logistics industry, or how profitable it could be when done efficiently at scale. The behind-the-scenes nature of the business meant that even people who relied on it daily had no understanding of its economic importance. Amazon made over $400 billion last year, I said. Most of that revenue came from exactly what I do, just at a much larger scale. There are thousands of companies that need these services, but can't afford to build their own fulfillment centers. That's where businesses like mine come in. Mark was beginning to understand now, his financial background allowing him to grasp the economic fundamentals more quickly than the others. So you're essentially running a smaller version of Amazon's warehouse operations? More like a specialized service provider, I corrected. I don't compete with Amazon directly. I serve smaller and mid-sized companies that need professional fulfillment services but aren't big enough to justify Amazon's requirements. It's a different market segment entirely. The explanation was helping them understand the business model, but I could see that they were still struggling with the larger implications. This wasn't just about understanding what I did for work. This was about reconsidering everything they thought they knew about my capabilities, my ambitions, and my place within the family structure. My mother was the first to voice what they were all thinking. Honey, if you've been this successful, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think you were struggling? The question was asked with such genuine confusion and hurt that I felt my anger beginning to soften into something more complicated. Looking at her face, I could see that she truly didn't understand how her behavior over the years had contributed to my decision to keep my success hidden. Because, I said quietly, every time I tried to talk about what I was working on, you all dismissed it as unrealistic dreaming. Every time I mentioned business ideas or entrepreneurial plans, you told me to be more practical and get a real job. So I got a real job at the coffee shop, and I used it as cover while I built something you would never have believed I could build. The truth of this statement was written on their faces. They all remembered the conversations I was referring to. The gentle discouragement disguised as practical advice. The suggestions that I focus on stability rather than chasing unrealistic goals. We were trying to protect you, my father said defensively. Most small businesses fail. We didn't want you to get hurt. So instead, you convinced me that you didn't believe in me, I replied. And when I succeeded anyway, I didn't feel safe sharing it with you because I was afraid you'd find some way to tear it down or convince me it wasn't real. The accusation hung heavy in the room, challenging them to examine their own behavior in a way that was clearly uncomfortable. They had always framed their discouragement as loving protection, but my success forced them to confront the possibility that their lack of faith had been more about their own limitations than mine. Rachel, who had been quietly processing everything, suddenly spoke up with a question that revealed she was beginning to grasp the fuller implications of what I'd revealed. Jess, if you have this much money, why are you still working at the coffee shop? Why are you still living in that tiny apartment? Why are you pretending to struggle when you don't have to? It was a fair question, and one that got to the heart of the choices I'd been making for years. The answer involved admitting things about myself and my relationship with my family that I wasn't sure I was ready to say out loud. Because, I said slowly, this was easier than dealing with all of this. I gestured around the room, encompassing the shocked faces, the scattered ceramic pieces still on the floor, the palpable tension that had replaced what should have been a peaceful Christmas morning. Because I knew that the moment you found out about my success, everything would change. You'd all start treating me differently, expecting different things from me, and I wasn't ready for that. I liked having a space where I could just be Jessica, without the weight of other people's expectations or assumptions about what my money meant or what I should be doing with it. The explanations seemed to land differently with each family member. Tyler looked almost impressed, as if he was beginning to appreciate the strategic thinking involved in maintaining such an elaborate cover story. Mark appeared to be calculating the financial implications of my choices, probably wondering about tax strategies and investment opportunities. But Rachel's reaction was the most intense. Her face had gone through surprise, confusion, and skepticism, and was now settling into something that looked dangerously close to anger. So you've been lying to us for 5 years, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. You've been letting us worry about you, letting us feel sorry for you, letting us pay for things because we thought you couldn't afford them. You've been making us feel guilty about our own success because we thought we were doing better than you. That's not just hiding something, Jess. That's actively deceiving people who love you. Her words stung because they contained a grain of truth that I hadn't fully acknowledged, even to myself. My decision to hide my success hadn't just been about protecting my privacy or avoiding unwanted expectations. It had also involved allowing my family to operate under false assumptions that sometimes worked to my advantage. How many family dinners had I avoided because they were at expensive restaurants I supposedly couldn't afford? How many group gifts had I contributed less to because everyone assumed I was barely making ends meet? How many conversations about money and success had I sat through quietly, letting them believe they were the only ones in the family who had figured out how to build wealth? You're right, I admitted. I wasn't just hiding my success, I was actively maintaining a deception. And some of that deception did protect me from things I didn't want to deal with. But Rachel, can you honestly tell me that if I had told you 5 years ago that I was starting a logistics company, you would have been supportive? Can you tell me that this family would have encouraged me to take that risk instead of pushing me towards something safer and more conventional? The question forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth about how they had all responded to my early entrepreneurial attempts. The silence that followed my challenge was answer enough. But Mark, apparently unwilling to let the conversation end on that note, decided to push the discussion in a different direction. Okay, so you've been successful, and you've been hiding it, he said. I still don't understand why you're telling us now. What changed? Why reveal all of this today? The question caught me off guard because I realized I didn't have a clear answer. The Tesla had been a careless mistake on my part. I'd been so focused on maintaining my cover story that I'd forgotten the most basic rule of deception: never let your different worlds collide. I had driven to my parents' house that morning because my usual public transportation route was disrupted by holiday schedule changes. It had seemed simpler to just drive, and I'd parked in what I thought was a discreet spot. I hadn't considered that Mark might notice the car, or that anyone would pay attention to what was in the driveway. I didn't plan to tell you, I admitted. This was an accident. I got careless. The honesty of this admission seemed to surprise them more than anything else I'd revealed. They had apparently assumed that my revelation was part of some larger strategy, but the truth was that I'd been caught off guard as much as they had been. So if Mark hadn't noticed the car, you would have just continued lying to us indefinitely? Rachel asked, her anger building again. I don't know, I said truthfully. Maybe. I hadn't really thought about an endgame for all of this. This admission opened up new questions about my long-term planning and my ultimate intentions for my family relationships. Questions I wasn't prepared to answer because I'd been so focused on managing the day-to-day aspects of my double life that I'd never seriously considered how or when it might end. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. The caller ID showed Alex Chen, my business partner and the person who helped me manage the day-to-day operations of Miller Logistics. Alex knew about my family situation and had strict instructions never to call me during family gatherings unless there was a genuine emergency. I looked at the phone, then at my family, and realized that the careful boundaries I'd maintained between my two worlds were already completely shattered. There was no point in maintaining the pretense anymore. I should take this, I said, answering the call. Hey Alex, what's going on? Jess, I'm sorry to bother you on Christmas, but we have a situation at the main warehouse. The automatic sorting system crashed overnight, and we have about 10,000 packages that need to go out today for next-day delivery commitments. I can handle it, but I need authorization to bring in emergency staff at overtime rates. The business crisis was exactly the kind of thing that required immediate decision-making, and I could feel my family listening to every word of the conversation. This was their first glimpse into the real-time operations of the company they'd just learned about, and I could see them trying to process the scale and complexity that Alex's call implied. How many people do you need? I asked, slipping automatically into the problem-solving mode that had become second nature over the years of running Miller Logistics. Probably 15 additional packers plus overtime for the regular shift supervisors. We're looking at about 8,000 in additional labor costs, but if we don't get these packages out today, we'll have to pay penalty fees to our clients. That will be 3 times that amount. The financial numbers being discussed so casually seemed to have a visible impact on my family. $8,000 in emergency labor costs was more money than most of them spent on a family vacation. But Alex and I were discussing it as a routine business decision. Approved, I said without hesitation. Do whatever you need to do to meet our commitments. And Alex, make sure the emergency staff gets paid double time plus a Christmas bonus. Nobody should have to leave their family on Christmas morning without being compensated fairly for it. You got it. Thanks, Jess. Sorry again for interrupting your family time. I hung up the phone and looked around the room at the faces staring at me. The brief conversation had probably done more to convince them of my business success than all the financial statements I'd shown them. They had just witnessed me making an $8,000 decision as casually as they might decide what to order for lunch. That was your business partner? My mother asked quietly. One of them? I confirmed. Alex handles operations while I focus more on client relationships and strategic planning. We have about 40 employees total, across 3 warehouse facilities. The numbers seemed to overwhelm them. 40 employees meant payroll responsibilities, insurance costs, worker compensation issues, and all the complex legal and financial obligations that came with running a substantial operation. It was the kind of responsibility that put my success into a completely different category from anything they had imagined. Tyler, who had been mostly quiet during the more heated parts of our conversation, suddenly spoke up with a question that revealed he was beginning to understand the broader implications of what I'd built. Jess, when you say you handle fulfillment for companies all over the West Coast, how many companies are we talking about? Currently about 230 active clients, I replied. Ranging from small craft businesses that might ship 50 orders a month to larger retailers doing thousands of orders per day. The scope of the operation was clearly beyond what any of them had imagined when I'd first explained the business model. 230 clients meant contracts, service agreements, quality metrics, customer service obligations, and all the infrastructure required to manage those relationships effectively. Mark's investment banking background was helping him grasp the financial implications faster than the others. Jess, if you're handling fulfillment for that many clients at the volumes you're describing, your annual revenue has to be enormous. Last year, we did about $12 million in gross revenue, I said quietly. This year, we're on track for about $18 million. The numbers landed like physical blows. $18 million in annual revenue put Miller Logistics into a completely different category from anything they had understood about small business success. This wasn't a side hustle that had gotten lucky. This was a substantial operation that competed with much larger companies in a highly competitive industry. Rachel had gone very quiet, and I could see her struggling to process what my success meant for her own sense of accomplishment and identity within the family. For years, she had been the golden child, the one who had figured out how to build a successful career and accumulate wealth. Now she was learning that her younger sister, the one everyone had pitied and worried about, had built something that dwarfed her own achievements. My parents were dealing with their own complex emotions. I could see pride beginning to mix with the shock and confusion, but there was also hurt at being excluded from such a significant part of my life, and probably some guilt about the assumptions they had made about my capabilities and ambitions. The Christmas morning that had started with gift exchanges and family updates had transformed into something none of us had anticipated. The Tesla in the driveway had been the key that unlocked 5 years of carefully maintained secrets, and now we were all trying to figure out what came next. The silence that followed my revenue disclosure felt different from the earlier quiet moments. This wasn't confusion or shock anymore. This was the heavy quiet of people trying to rebuild their entire understanding of someone they thought they knew completely. I could practically hear the mental recalculations happening as each family member tried to fit this new information into their existing framework of who Jessica Miller was supposed to be. My father was the first to break the silence, but his voice carried a tremor I'd rarely heard before. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did we fail you somehow? Did we make you feel like you couldn't trust us with the truth about your success? The question hit me harder than any of the earlier accusations or demands for proof. Bob Miller wasn't asking about business models or financial statements anymore. He was asking whether his parenting had somehow created a daughter who felt the need to hide her greatest achievements from the people who raised her. Dad, it's not that simple, I began, but he held up his hand to stop me. No, let me finish. I've been sitting here listening to all of this, and I keep coming back to one thing. You didn't just hide a small success from us. You didn't just downplay some minor accomplishment. You built an empire, Jessica. You became wealthy beyond anything any of us ever imagined, and you felt like you had to pretend to struggle just to maintain peace with your own family. That tells me we did something very wrong somewhere along the way. His words carried a weight of genuine remorse that made my chest tighten. I had spent so much energy over the years protecting myself from their disappointment, and managing their expectations, that I had never fully considered how my deception might affect them. Seeing my father's genuine anguish forced me to confront the collateral damage my choices had created. "You didn't fail me, Dad," I said quietly, "but you also didn't believe in me. There's a difference." Rachel stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a harsh sound that made everyone flinch. Her face had cycled through multiple emotions over the past hour, but now it had settled into something that looked dangerously close to rage. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "We're all sitting here acting like Jessica is some kind of victim, like we somehow forced her to lie to us for 5 years. But what about us? What about the fact that she's been manipulating our emotions, letting us worry about her, letting us feel guilty about our own success because we thought she was struggling?" Her voice was rising with each word, and I could see years of suppressed competition and sibling rivalry bubbling to the surface. Rachel had built her identity around being the successful daughter, the one who had figured out how to navigate the adult world while her younger sister floundered. Now that foundation was crumbling, and she was lashing out at everyone within reach. "Rachel, calm down," Mark said, but his attempt at de-escalation only seemed to fuel her anger. "Don't tell me to calm down," she shot back. "Do you have any idea what this means? Do you understand what she's been doing to us psychologically? I've spent years feeling sorry for her, years making excuses for her absences at family events, years talking to Mom and Dad about how we could help her get back on her feet. And the whole time, she was sitting on millions of dollars, probably laughing at how gullible we all were." The accusation that I had been laughing at them stung, because it revealed how little Rachel understood about the emotional cost of maintaining my deception. There had been nothing amusing about sitting through family gatherings where my supposed failures were discussed with barely concealed concern and disappointment. There had been nothing funny about watching my parents worry about my future, while I carried the weight of knowing I was successful beyond their wildest dreams, but couldn't share that success with them. "I wasn't laughing at anyone," I said, my own anger beginning to rise. "Do you think this was fun for me? Do you think I enjoyed sitting through Christmas dinners where everyone talked around me like I was a charity case? Do you think I liked watching Mom and Dad worry about my future while I knew I had more financial security than any of us?" "Then why did you do it?" Rachel demanded. "If it was so awful, why keep lying?" The question forced me to confront the deeper psychological reasons for my choices, motivations that I hadn't fully examined even in private. Why had I chosen isolation over inclusion? Why had I preferred their pity to their potential pride? "Because I was afraid," I admitted. "I was afraid that if you knew about my success, you'd find some way to diminish it or tear it down. I was afraid that you'd make it about yourselves somehow, or that you'd start expecting things from me that I wasn't ready to give. And I was afraid that even if you were happy for me, you'd never see me the same way again." Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during most of this discussion, suddenly spoke up with an insight that surprised me. "You were afraid we'd treat you like a bank account instead of a sister." His observation was more perceptive than I had expected from my younger brother, and it cut straight to one of my core fears about revealing my wealth. I had seen how money changed family dynamics in other situations, how success could transform loving relationships into transactional ones. The idea of my family suddenly viewing me primarily through the lens of my financial resources rather than as Jessica had been terrifying enough to justify years of deception. "Partly, yes," I confirmed. "But it was more complicated than that. I was also afraid that you'd all start questioning every choice I made, every purchase I didn't make, every time I said I couldn't afford something. I was afraid that my money would become everyone's business, and I'd lose any sense of privacy or autonomy over my own life." Mark was nodding slowly, his investment banking experience giving him insight into the psychological pressures that came with significant wealth. "That's actually not uncommon," he said. "I've seen a lot of clients struggle with family dynamics after coming into serious money. The expectations and assumptions can be overwhelming." But Rachel wasn't interested in understanding my psychological motivations. Her anger had reached a boiling point, and she was ready to lay out grievances that had apparently been building for years. "You want to talk about expectations?" she said, her voice dripping with resentment. "Let's talk about how I've been the responsible one in this family for the past decade. Let's talk about how I've been the one checking on Mom and Dad. organizing family gatherings, making sure everyone stays connected. Let's talk about how I've been carrying the emotional labor of this family while you've been playing your little victim game and hiding behind your fake poverty. Her words revealed a dynamic I hadn't fully appreciated. While I had been building my business and maintaining my cover story, Rachel had indeed been taking on the role of family organizer and emotional caretaker. She had been the one planning holiday gatherings, coordinating group gifts, and managing the complex logistics of keeping an extended family connected. But her resentment also revealed something else. Rachel had been using her role as the successful, responsible sister to establish her position within the family hierarchy. My hidden success wasn't just threatening her sense of accomplishment, it was undermining the entire foundation of her family identity. "I never asked you to carry that burden," I said quietly. "And I never asked you to make excuses for my absence or manage everyone's expectations about my life." "You didn't have to ask," she replied bitterly. "Someone had to do it, and it sure wasn't going to be you. You were too busy playing your pathetic little role to take any responsibility for maintaining family relationships." The conversation was spiraling into territory that felt dangerous and potentially irreversible. Years of suppressed resentment and misunderstanding were pouring out, and I could see that we were approaching a point where permanent damage to our relationships became a real possibility. My mother, who had been listening to this exchange with growing distress, finally intervened with the kind of firm maternal authority that could still command attention from her adult children. "That's enough," she said sharply. "Both of you need to stop attacking each other and start trying to understand what actually happened here. Rachel, Jessica didn't force you to take on family responsibilities. You chose to do that because you wanted to, and because it made you feel important and needed. And Jessica, your sister has a right to feel hurt and betrayed by your deception, even if your reasons for hiding your success were understandable." Linda Miller's assessment was uncomfortably accurate for both of us. She had identified the core issues driving our conflict: Rachel's need to be seen as the responsible, successful sister, and by fear of vulnerability and loss of control. But her intervention also created space for a more honest conversation about what had really been happening in our family dynamics over the past 5 years. "Mom's right," I admitted. "Rachel, I'm sorry that my choices put extra pressure on you. I didn't fully realize how my absence from family activities was affecting everyone else, or how much work you were doing to manage the family's response to my supposed struggles." Rachel's anger seemed to deflate slightly at my apology, but she wasn't ready to let go of her resentment entirely. "It's not just about the work, Jess, it's about feeling like an idiot. Do you have any idea how many conversations I've had with friends and colleagues about my struggling sister? How many times I've defended your choices or made excuses for your lifestyle? I feel like a complete fool." Her embarrassment was understandable and probably unavoidable. Rachel had undoubtedly shared her concerns about my financial situation with people in her professional and social circles, framing herself as the supportive sister who was worried about her siblings' future. Now she would have to explain to those same people that her struggling sister was actually more successful than she was. "I understand why you feel that way," I said. "And I'm sorry that my deception put you in that position. But Rachel, I need you to understand something. The reason I was able to build my business successfully was precisely because I didn't have family pressure or expectations weighing on me. The freedom to fail privately gave me the courage to take risks that I might not have taken if everyone was watching and offering advice." Mark leaned forward, his analytical mind engaging with the business implications of what I was describing. "That's actually a documented phenomenon in entrepreneurship," he said. "Family pressure and expectations can be paralyzing for people trying to start businesses. A lot of successful entrepreneurs deliberately keep their ventures quiet during the early stages to avoid well-meaning interference." His validation was helpful, but it also opened up new questions about the long-term sustainability of the approach I had chosen. Building a business in secret might have provided psychological protection during the startup phase, but maintaining that secrecy indefinitely created its own set of problems and complications. Tyler was the one who voiced what everyone else was probably thinking. "So what happens now? Do you keep pretending to work at the coffee shop? Do you move out of your apartment and buy a mansion? Do we all just pretend that the last 5 years didn't happen?" His questions highlighted the practical challenges that my revelation had created. The carefully constructed boundaries between my two lives had been completely demolished, and we all had to figure out how to navigate the new reality without a roadmap or precedent to guide us. I don't know, I said honestly. I hadn't planned for this moment, so I don't have a strategy for what comes next. I guess we all have to figure out how to have an honest relationship now that the truth is out there. Stephanie, who had been trying to blend into the background during most of this family drama, suddenly spoke up with a question that revealed she had been paying closer attention than anyone realized. "Can I ask something?" she said tentatively. "Jessica, you said you started this business 5 years ago, right after you dropped out of college. But you also said you bought the coffee shop. So you've been running 2 businesses this whole time?" Her question forced me to clarify an aspect of my situation that I had glossed over earlier. The relationship between Grind Coffee and Miller Logistics was more complex than I had explained, and it highlighted just how thoroughly I had constructed my cover story. "The coffee shop was part of my strategy," I explained. "I needed a believable explanation for how I spent my time, and I needed a legitimate source of income that would satisfy anyone who asked questions about my finances. When Frank wanted to retire, buying Grind gave me both of those things. It's a small operation, only 6 employees, but it provides enough documented income to justify my apartment and basic living expenses." The strategic thinking behind my deception was becoming clearer to them now. This hadn't been a simple lie or a moment of deception that had spiraled out of control. I had systematically constructed an entire alternative persona, complete with documentation, references, and a plausible backstory that could withstand casual scrutiny. "You've been running a laundering operation," Mark said, though his tone suggested professional admiration rather than moral judgment. "Using the coffee shop to provide cover for your real business activities." His description made my activities sound more criminal than they actually were, but he wasn't entirely wrong about the underlying strategy. I had been deliberately obscuring the source and scale of my wealth to maintain my privacy and avoid unwanted attention. "It wasn't laundering exactly," I said. "All of my income from Miller Logistics is properly reported and taxed. The coffee shop just provides a visible, understandable explanation for why I have enough money to live independently without appearing to struggle." Bob had been listening to this explanation with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was trying to understand not just what I had done, but how I had managed to do it so successfully for so long. "Jessica, the level of planning and execution you're describing is extraordinary," he said slowly. "You didn't just hide a business from us. You created an entire parallel life, complete with financial documentation, business relationships, and a cover story that was sophisticated enough to fool your own family for 5 years. That requires a level of strategic thinking and operational discipline that I never would have attributed to you." His assessment was accurate but also revealed one of the fundamental problems that had driven my deception in the first place. My family's inability to imagine me capable of sophisticated strategic thinking had been one of the reasons I felt the need to hide my success from them. They had seen me as someone who needed protection and guidance, not someone who could successfully navigate complex business and financial challenges. "Maybe that's part of the problem," I said quietly. "Maybe the reason I felt like I had to hide my success was because none of you ever believed I was capable of this kind of success in the first place." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, forcing them to confront their own assumptions and biases about my capabilities. It was one thing to acknowledge that they had been deceived. It was another to examine whether their own behavior had contributed to creating the conditions that made that deception feel necessary. Rachel was the first to respond, and her answer revealed that she was beginning to grapple with some uncomfortable truths about her own attitudes toward her younger sister. "You're probably right," she admitted reluctantly. "I don't think any of us ever really took your business ideas seriously. We saw them as hobbies or fantasies, not as legitimate entrepreneurial ventures. And we probably communicated that skepticism in ways that made you feel like you couldn't trust us with the truth." Her acknowledgement was more than I had expected and more than I had hoped for. It represented a genuine recognition that the family dynamics that had driven my deception were more complex than simple lies and hurt feelings. My mother was nodding along with Rachel's assessment, her face showing the kind of regret that comes from recognizing missed opportunities and failed communication. "I think we all assumed that because you were the youngest, you needed more guidance and protection," she said. We were so focused on trying to help you avoid mistakes that we never really gave you credit for being capable of making good decisions on your own." Tyler's reaction was different from the others. Instead of regret or defensive anger, he seemed genuinely impressed by what I had accomplished and curious about the details of how I had managed to pull it off. "Jess, can I ask about the logistics of maintaining the deception?" he said. "Like, how did you handle tax filings? How did you keep your business associates from accidentally mentioning Miller Logistics to family members? How did you manage the practical day-to-day stuff that could have exposed you?" His questions revealed an appreciation for the operational complexity of what I had been managing. Maintaining two separate professional identities while building a multi-million-dollar business required careful attention to hundreds of small details that could have exposed my deception at any moment. "It was actually easier than you might think," I explained. "I used my business address for all Miller Logistics correspondence, so nothing ever came to my apartment. I kept my business phone separate from my personal phone, and I was very careful about when and where I took business calls. My accountant and lawyer both understood the privacy concerns, so they knew not to contact me through channels that might compromise my cover story." Mark was shaking his head with what appeared to be professional admiration. The compartmentalization required for that level of operational security is impressive. Most people would have made mistakes that exposed them within months, not years. His validation was gratifying, but also highlighted something I was only beginning to understand myself. The skills required to successfully maintain my deception were the same skills that had made me successful in business: strategic thinking, attention to detail, risk management, and the ability to maintain multiple complex relationships simultaneously. "Maybe that's why the business succeeded," I said, thinking out loud. The same personality traits that made me capable of hiding my success also made me good at building and managing a complex operation. The conversation was moving into territory that felt less emotionally charged and more analytically interesting. We were beginning to examine not just what had happened, but why it had happened, and what it revealed about family dynamics, entrepreneurship, and the psychology of success and secrecy. But just as the discussion was beginning to feel more constructive and less accusatory, my phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed Jennifer Walsh, my lawyer, and I knew immediately that this wasn't going to be a routine business call. Jennifer never called on holidays unless there was a serious legal issue that required immediate attention. The timing of her call, coming in the middle of my family's discovery of my business success, felt ominous in a way that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "I should take this," I said, but this time I didn't explain who was calling or why. Something about Jennifer's timing suggested that this conversation might involve information that would complicate an already complex situation. "Jennifer, what's wrong?" I answered. "Jess, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "I just got a call from a reporter at the Portland Business Journal. Someone tipped them off about Miller Logistics, and they're planning to run a feature story about successful Portland entrepreneurs in their New Year's edition. They want to interview you and do a photo shoot at your warehouse facilities." The news hit me like cold water. A major business publication was planning to expose my success publicly, which would make my family's discovery of my wealth seem like a minor privacy breach in comparison. If the Portland Business Journal ran a feature story about Miller Logistics, everyone in my personal and professional networks would learn about my business success simultaneously. "How did they find out?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "It sounds like someone nominated you for their Entrepreneurs Under 30 Feet feature. The reporter said they received a detailed tip about your business, including financial information and growth metrics that aren't publicly available. Someone with inside knowledge of your operation provided that information." The implications of Jennifer's words were staggering. Only a handful of people had access to the detailed financial information about Miller Logistics that would be required for such a nomination. My business partner Alex, my accountant David, Jennifer herself, and a few of my key employees were the only ones who knew enough about the company's performance to provide the kind of detailed information a reporter would need. Someone in my inner circle had betrayed my confidence in a way that threatened to expose not just my business success, but the elaborate deception I had been maintaining with my family. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Someone had known about my family situation, and had deliberately chosen Christmas Day to force my hand. Who submitted the nomination? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. They won't reveal their source, Jennifer said. But Jess, there's more. The reporter has apparently been investigating your background, and they've discovered that you own Grind Coffee as well. They're framing this as a story about a young entrepreneur who's been quietly building a business empire while flying under the radar. They want to interview your employees, your family, your business associates. This is going to be a comprehensive profile, not just a simple business feature. The scope of the investigation Jennifer was describing would destroy any remaining privacy I had about my business activities. If reporters started interviewing my employees and business associates, the carefully constructed boundaries between my two lives would be obliterated completely. Worse, if they interviewed my family before I had a chance to manage the situation, they would discover the extent of my deception and potentially make that part of the story as well. The narrative could easily shift from successful young entrepreneur to, quote, woman who deceived her family for years while building secret business empire. How much time do I have? I asked. They want to schedule the interview for next week, Jennifer replied. But Jess, once this story runs, your privacy is gone forever. Miller Logistics will be public knowledge, your financial success will be documented in print, and everyone in Portland's business community will know who you are. There's no putting this genie back in the bottle. I looked around the room at my family, who were all staring at me with expressions that ranged from concern to curiosity. They could obviously tell from my side of the conversation that something significant was happening, but they had no way of understanding the full implications of what Jennifer was telling me. The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. I had spent 5 years carefully protecting my privacy and managing the information flow about my business success, only to have it all exposed by someone who apparently thought they were doing me a favor by nominating me for recognition. I need to think about this, I told Jennifer. Can you stall them for a few days while I figure out how to handle it? I can try, she said. But Jess, you need to understand that this is happening whether you cooperate or not. If you don't participate in the interview, they'll run the story anyway based on the information they already have. Your only choice is whether you want to control the narrative or let them tell your story without your input. The choice Jennifer was presenting was between bad and worse. I could participate in the interview and try to manage how my story was told, or I could refuse to cooperate and let a reporter construct their own narrative based on whatever information they could gather from other sources. I understand, I said. I'll call you back tomorrow with my decision. I hung up the phone and looked around the room at the faces of my family members, all of whom were clearly waiting for an explanation of what they had just overheard. That was my lawyer, I said quietly. It looks like my business success is about to become very public knowledge, whether I want it to or not. The weight of Jennifer's words settled over the room like a heavy blanket, and I could see my family beginning to grasp that this Christmas morning revelation was about to become much more complicated than a simple family secret being exposed. The idea that my business success would soon be documented in a major publication added an entirely new dimension to an already overwhelming situation. Tyler was the first to speak, his voice carrying a mixture of excitement and concern. Wait, you're going to be in the Portland Business Journal? That's huge, Jess. That's like the biggest business publication in the state. His enthusiasm was understandable, but also highlighted how little he understood about the implications of unwanted publicity. For Tyler, being featured in a major business publication would be an unqualified triumph, a validation of success that most entrepreneurs could only dream of achieving. But for me, it represented a complete loss of control over information that I had spent 5 years carefully managing. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly. Someone nominated me without my knowledge or consent, and now I have to decide whether to participate in an interview that will expose everything about my business and potentially my personal life as well. Mark's investment banking background was helping him understand the strategic implications more quickly than the others. Jess, you realize that once this story runs, you're going to be a public figure in Portland's business community. People will know who you are, what you're worth, and what you've accomplished. That's going to change everything about how you can operate, both professionally and personally. His assessment was accurate and terrifying. I had built my entire life around privacy and anonymity, carefully avoiding the kind of public recognition that would make it impossible to maintain my quiet existence. The prospect of becoming a recognizable figure in Portland's business scene felt like a fundamental threat to the identity I had constructed for myself. Rachel had been uncharacteristically quiet during this exchange, but I could see her processing the implications of what media attention might mean for our family dynamics. If reporters started investigating my background and interviewing people who knew me, the story of my deception would inevitably become part of the narrative. "Jessica," she said slowly, "if this reporter talks to our friends, our neighbors, people we work with, they're going to find out that we had no idea about your success. They're going to realize that you've been lying to your own family for years. This isn't just going to expose your business, it's going to expose our entire family's dysfunction." Her concern was valid and added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. The reporter's investigation wouldn't just reveal my business success. It would inevitably uncover the elaborate deception that had allowed me to hide that success from the people closest to me. The story could easily become as much about family dynamics and secrecy as about entrepreneurial achievement. My mother was looking increasingly distressed as she began to understand the full scope of what we were facing. "Honey, what are you going to do? Can you refuse to participate? Can your lawyers stop them from writing the story?" Her questions revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how journalism worked. But they also highlighted the desperation that all of us were beginning to feel, as we realized that the situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "I can refuse to participate," I explained, "but that won't stop them from writing the story. They already have enough information to publish a feature about Miller Logistics with or without my cooperation. My only choice is whether I want to try to influence how the story is told, or let them construct their own narrative based on whatever they can find out from other sources." The strategic decision I was facing was complicated by the fact that my family was now aware of the situation and would inevitably become part of the story regardless of what I chose to do. If I participated in the interview, I would have some control over how my success was presented, but I would also be voluntarily stepping into a spotlight that I had spent years avoiding. If I refused to participate, I would maintain some privacy in the short term, but I would have no influence over how my story was told or what aspects of my life the reporter chose to emphasize. Bob had been listening to this discussion with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was trying to understand not just the immediate crisis, but the longer-term implications for our family relationships and my business operations. "Jessica, let me ask you something," he said carefully, setting aside the family issues for a moment. "Is this publicity good or bad for Miller Logistics? Will being featured in a major business publication help or hurt your company?" His question forced me to consider the business implications of the media attention, which I had been so focused on the personal privacy issues that I hadn't fully evaluated. From a purely business perspective, being featured in the Portland Business Journal would likely be beneficial for Miller Logistics. The publicity would enhance our credibility with potential clients, could help with recruiting talented employees, and might open doors to new business opportunities that had previously been unavailable. Professionally, it would probably be good for the company, I admitted. This kind of recognition could help us attract larger clients and establish Miller Logistics as a major player in the regional logistics industry. But personally, it's the last thing I want. The conflict between my personal preferences and my business interests was becoming clearer as I talked through the implications. As the owner of a growing company, I had responsibilities to my employees, my clients, and my business partners that extended beyond my own comfort level with publicity. Alex had been working alongside me for years to build Miller Logistics into a successful operation, and my 42 employees depended on the company's continued growth and success for their livelihoods. Mark was nodding as he followed my analysis. "So you're facing a choice between what's best for Jessica the private person and what's best for Jessica the business owner. Those interests don't align in this situation." His summary was accurate, but also highlighted the fundamental tension that had been driving many of my decisions over the past 5 years. The strategies that had protected my privacy and allowed me to maintain control over my personal information had also limited my ability to fully capitalize on my business success. By avoiding publicity and recognition, I had been constraining the growth potential of Miller Logistics in ways that were becoming increasingly costly. Stephanie, who had been quietly observing this family crisis unfold, suddenly spoke up with a question that revealed she had been thinking about the broader implications of what we were discussing. "Can I ask something that might be obvious?" she said hesitantly. Jessica, if you've been this successful for years, why is it only now that someone is nominating you for recognition? What changed that made your business visible to people who would submit this kind of nomination? Her question was perceptive and highlighted something I should have been paying more attention to. Miller Logistics had been growing steadily for years, but something had recently changed that had brought us to the attention of people outside our immediate business circle. The timing of the nomination wasn't coincidental. It was connected to some development that had made our success more visible to the broader business community. That's a good question, I said, thinking through the recent changes in our operations. We've been expanding rapidly over the past year, adding new warehouse facilities and taking on larger clients. We also started working with some major outdoor gear companies that have higher profiles than our typical clients. It's possible that our growth has made us more visible to people who track business developments in the region. But even as I offered this explanation, I was beginning to suspect that the nomination might have been more deliberate than I had initially realized. The detailed financial information that Jennifer had mentioned would have required access to confidential business records that weren't available to casual observers. Someone with inside knowledge of Miller Logistics had made a conscious decision to expose my success, and the timing suggested that this decision might have been connected to my family situation. Tyler was following a similar line of thinking. Jess, do you think someone at your company might have submitted the nomination? Like, someone who thought you deserved recognition, but didn't realize you were trying to keep a low profile? His suggestion was plausible and would explain both the detailed information and the timing of the nomination. One of my employees or business associates might have genuinely believed they were doing me a favor by nominating me for recognition, not understanding the complex personal reasons why I had been avoiding publicity. It's possible, I said, but I'm not sure it matters at this point. Regardless of who submitted the nomination or why, I still have to decide how to handle the situation. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing again. This time the caller ID showed Alex Chen, and I suspected that this call might be related to the media attention that Jennifer had warned me about. Alex, please tell me you're not calling about the Portland Business Journal, I said as I answered. I wish I could, Alex replied, his voice carrying a tension that I rarely heard. But I just got a call from the same reporter who apparently contacted your lawyer. She's been asking our warehouse supervisors about Miller Logistics, trying to get information about our operations, our growth trajectory, our employee satisfaction. A few of our people have already talked to her before they realized they should probably check with us first. The news that reporters were already interviewing my employees added urgency to the situation that I hadn't anticipated. If my staff was talking to journalists without coordination or preparation, there was no telling what information might be shared or how it might be characterized in the eventual story. What did they tell her? I asked. Mostly positive things about working for the company and how much it's grown over the past few years, Alex said. But Jess, a few of them mentioned that you also own Grind Coffee, and one of the supervisors told her that you're very private about your personal life, and that most of us don't know much about your background or family situation. The information that Alex was describing would be catnip for a journalist looking to add human interest elements to a business story. The fact that I was unusually private about my personal life would naturally lead to questions about what I might be hiding, or why I had chosen to maintain such strict boundaries between my professional and personal identities. Did anyone mention my family specifically? I asked, though I was afraid I already knew the answer. Not directly, Alex said, but when the reporter asked about your background and whether you came from a business family, one of the guys said something like, I don't think so, she seems pretty normal and down to earth. I think he was trying to be complimentary, but it might have given the reporter the impression that there's an interesting story there. The implications of my employees' well-intentioned comments were becoming clear. A reporter who had started out investigating a successful young entrepreneur was now discovering hints of a more complex personal story involving family dynamics and deliberate privacy maintenance. The human interest angle was exactly what would make the story more compelling and more likely to attract attention from readers. Alex, I need you to send a message to all our employees, asking them not to speak to reporters without checking with us first, I said. And I need you to compile a list of everyone who might have access to the kind of detailed financial information that would be required for the nomination. We need to figure out how this started." "Already on it," Alex replied. "But Jess, I have to ask, how do you want to handle this? Do you want to participate in the interview, or do you want me to try to manage the situation from the business side?" The question forced me to confront the reality that I couldn't manage this crisis alone. The media attention was affecting not just my personal privacy, but the operations of Miller Logistics and the livelihoods of my employees. I had built the company as a private venture, but its success had made it a public interest story, whether I wanted that attention or not. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I think I need to make a decision quickly before this gets any more complicated." I hung up the phone and looked around the room at my family members, all of whom had been listening to my conversation with expressions that ranged from fascination to concern. They were getting a real-time glimpse into the complexity of the business crisis that was unfolding alongside our personal family drama. "So what are you going to do?" Rachel asked, and for the first time since the Tesla revelation, her voice carried genuine concern, rather than anger or resentment. The question forced me to articulate a decision that I had been avoiding since Jennifer's first call. I could continue trying to maintain my privacy and control the information flow, or I could accept that my secret was out and try to manage the transition to a more public existence as gracefully as possible. "I think I have to do the interview," I said slowly. "If I don't participate, the story will be written without my input, and there's no telling what narrative they'll construct based on whatever information they can gather from other sources. At least if I cooperate, I can try to influence how the story is told." Mark was nodding approvingly. "That's probably the smart business decision. You can use the interview to present Miller Logistics in the best possible light and potentially attract new clients or business opportunities." But Tyler was thinking about the personal implications. "What about us? What are you going to tell the reporter about why you kept your success secret from your family?" His question highlighted the most delicate aspect of the situation. Any honest discussion of my business success would inevitably lead to questions about my personal life and family relationships. I would have to find a way to explain 5 years of deception without throwing my family under the bus or making them look foolish for not recognizing my success. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm hoping I can keep the focus on the business aspects and avoid getting into too much detail about personal matters." Rachel was shaking her head. "Jess, that's not going to work. If you own a coffee shop and a multi-million-dollar logistics company, but you've been living like someone who barely makes ends meet, reporters are going to want to know why. The personal story is what makes the business story interesting." Her assessment was probably accurate. The contrast between my apparent lifestyle and my actual financial situation was exactly the kind of human interest angle that would make the story compelling to readers. A straightforward business profile about a successful logistics company would be moderately interesting to the business community. But a story about a young entrepreneur who had secretly built a business empire while maintaining an elaborate cover story would be fascinating to a much broader audience. My mother was looking increasingly worried as she began to understand the full scope of what media attention might mean for our family's privacy. "Jessica, if this story runs, everyone we know will read it," she said. "Our neighbors, our friends, people we work with. They're all going to know about your success, and they're going to know that we didn't know about it. That's going to be embarrassing for all of us." Her concern was valid and highlighted one of the most difficult aspects of the situation. The media attention wouldn't just affect me. It would expose our entire family to scrutiny and potentially embarrassing questions about our relationships and communication patterns. "I know, Mom," I said quietly, "and I'm sorry that my choices have put you in this position. But I think trying to hide from the story at this point would only make things worse." Bob had been listening to this discussion with the kind of thoughtful attention that suggested he was trying to understand not just the immediate crisis, but the longer-term implications for our family relationships. "Jessica, let me ask you something," he said carefully. "If you do this interview, and if the story runs, what happens to your relationship with us? Do you go back to pretending to work at the coffee shop? Or do we finally start having honest conversations about your life and your success?" His question cut to the heart of the matter. The media attention was forcing a reckoning not just with the outside world, but with the fundamental dynamics that had allowed my deception to persist for 5 years. If I was going to be publicly recognized as a successful entrepreneur, I couldn't continue maintaining the fiction that I was struggling to make ends meet. I guess we'll have to figure out how to have a real relationship, I said. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not, and you can't keep treating me like someone who needs protection and guidance, rather than someone who's built something significant. The acknowledgement that our relationships would have to change was both liberating and terrifying. For 5 years, I had been able to retreat into my private world whenever family dynamics became overwhelming. If my success became public knowledge, that escape route would no longer be available. Rachel was the first to respond to my challenge. "You're right," she said quietly. "We're going to have to learn how to see you as someone who's actually more successful than any of us, not as the little sister who needed our help and protection." Her admission was more than I had expected, and suggested that she was beginning to process the full implications of what my success meant for our family dynamics. The revelation that I had been more successful than any of them while they worried about my future was forcing all of us to reconsider our assumptions about capability, achievement, and family roles. Tyler was looking at me with an expression that seemed to combine admiration and curiosity. "Jess, can I ask you something? Now that the secret's out, what's it like to actually be wealthy? Like, what do you do with all that money if you're not buying expensive things or living in a fancy house?" His question was innocent, but also highlighted how little any of them understood about the psychological aspects of wealth accumulation. The assumption that money automatically translated into conspicuous consumption revealed their own relationship with financial success and status symbols. "Honestly, most of it just sits in investment accounts," I said. "I don't have expensive tastes, and I don't need material things to feel successful. The money represents security and freedom, more than anything else. I know that I'll never have to worry about basic needs, and I have the flexibility to make choices based on what I want to do rather than what I can afford." Mark was nodding with understanding. "That's actually a very mature approach to wealth management. A lot of people who come into money quickly make the mistake of immediately upgrading their lifestyle to match their new financial position. You've been smart to maintain your expenses while building your asset base." His professional validation was gratifying, but it also highlighted the irony that I had been making sophisticated financial decisions while my family assumed I was financially illiterate. The gap between their perceptions and my reality had been even larger than I had realized. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing again. This time the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but Jennifer had warned me that reporters might start calling directly once they realized that going through intermediaries wasn't producing the cooperation they wanted. "This is probably the reporter," I said, looking at the screen. "I think I need to answer this call and try to get some control over the situation." I took a deep breath and answered the phone. "This is Jessica Miller." "Miss Miller, this is Sarah Thompson from the Portland Business Journal. I hope you're enjoying your holiday, but I wanted to reach out about a story I'm working on, featuring successful young entrepreneurs in the Portland area. I understand that you own Miller Logistics, and I'd love to schedule an interview to discuss your business success and growth trajectory." The reporter's voice was professional but persistent, and I could hear the kind of confidence that suggested she was used to getting the interviews she wanted. She was treating this as a routine business feature, apparently unaware of the personal complications that her investigation was creating. "I appreciate your interest," I said carefully, "but I'm generally quite private about my business activities. Can you tell me who nominated me for this feature?" "I'm afraid I can't reveal my sources," she replied, "but I can tell you that the nomination included some impressive financial information about Miller Logistics. Your company's growth trajectory over the past 5 years has been remarkable, and I think our readers would be very interested in learning about the strategies and decisions that have driven that success." Her response confirmed that whoever had nominated me had provided detailed financial information that wouldn't be available to casual observers. The level of detail suggested that someone with intimate knowledge of Miller Logistics had made a deliberate decision to expose my success, possibly without fully understanding the personal implications of that decision. "Ms. Thompson, I'm going to need some time to consider whether I want to participate in this feature," I said. "Can you give me a few days to think about it?" "Of course," she replied, "but I should let you know that I'm planning to run the story in our New Year's edition regardless of whether you choose to participate." I already have enough information about Miller Logistics to write a compelling piece about your success. Your participation would allow you to ensure that the story accurately represents your perspective and your company's achievements. The implicit threat in her words was clear. She was going to write the story with or without my cooperation, and my only choice was whether I wanted to have input into how it was told. The pressure tactic was probably standard practice for business journalists, but it effectively eliminated any illusion I might have had about maintaining control over the situation. I understand, I said. I'll get back to you by tomorrow with my decision. I hung up the phone and looked around the room at my family members, all of whom had been listening to my conversation with obvious interest. They had just heard me negotiating with a reporter about a story that would inevitably affect all of them, and I could see them processing the implications of what they had heard. So she's going to write the story whether you cooperate or not, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. That's what she said, I confirmed. Which means I have to decide whether I want to try to influence how the story is told, or just hope that whatever she writes isn't too damaging. Mark was already thinking about damage control strategies. If you're going to do the interview, you should probably prepare carefully. Think about what key messages you want to communicate about Miller Logistics, and practice staying on those topics even if she tries to steer the conversation toward more personal matters. His advice was sound, but also highlighted the fundamental challenge I was facing. Any honest discussion of my business success would inevitably lead to questions about my personal life and the choices I had made about privacy and family communication. I couldn't separate the business story from the personal story, no matter how much I might want to. I think I need to call Jennifer back and discuss strategy, I said. This is too important to handle without professional guidance. But before I could make that call, Tyler spoke up with a suggestion that surprised me. Jess, what if we all did the interview together? He said. What if you presented this as a story about family support and understanding, rather than trying to hide the fact that you kept your success secret? You could frame it as a story about how families can have different approaches to privacy and success, and how we've all learned to respect each other's choices. His suggestion was creative and potentially brilliant. Instead of trying to downplay or hide the family dynamics that had driven my deception, I could present them as a positive example of how families can navigate different approaches to success and privacy. The story could become about understanding and respect, rather than deception and conflict. Rachel was nodding slowly as she considered Tyler's proposal. That could actually work, she said. If we all present a united front and frame your privacy choices as something we've learned to support, it turns the story into something positive, rather than something embarrassing. The idea that my family would be willing to participate in the interview to help me manage the narrative was both touching and surprising. After the morning's emotional confrontations and accusations, I hadn't expected them to offer such support. You would all be willing to do that? I asked. Of course, my mother said immediately. We're family, Jessica. We may not always understand each other's choices, but we support each other when it matters. Her words carried the weight of genuine commitment, and I felt a surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. For 5 years, I had been convinced that my family wouldn't understand or support my unconventional approach to success. But when faced with a genuine crisis, they were rallying around me in ways that I hadn't expected. Bob was already thinking through the practical implications of Tyler's suggestion. If we all participate, we need to coordinate our message, he said. We need to present a consistent story about how our family handles privacy and success. And we need to make sure that story reflects positively on both Jessica and Miller Logistics. His strategic thinking was exactly what I needed to hear. This was a crisis that required careful planning and coordination, not just emotional support. If we were going to turn this media attention into a positive opportunity, we needed to approach it with the same level of strategic thinking that I had applied to building my business. I think Tyler's idea could work, I said. But I need to discuss it with Jennifer to make sure we're not creating any legal or strategic problems by having multiple family members involved in the interview. The conversation continued for another hour as we worked through the practical details of how to handle the media attention while protecting both my business interests and our family relationships. By the time we finished planning, I felt like I had a strategy that could turn a potential crisis into an opportunity for positive recognition. 3 weeks later, the Portland Business Journal ran a feature story titled, "The Quiet Empire: How Jessica Miller Built a Multi-Million-Dollar Business While Keeping Her Family's Values. The article presented Miller Logistics as a model of sustainable growth and ethical business practices, while portraying my family as supportive and understanding of my unconventional approach to privacy and success. The story generated significant positive attention for Miller Logistics, resulting in inquiries from potential clients and job applications from talented professionals who wanted to work for a company that valued both achievement and humility. My family was presented as a close-knit unit that had learned to respect individual differences while maintaining strong bonds. More importantly, the media attention forced all of us to develop a more honest and direct relationship. I moved out of my small apartment and into a house that better reflected my actual financial situation, while maintaining my ownership of Grind Coffee as both a business investment and a connection to the community that had supported me during my early entrepreneurial years. The Tesla that had started this entire revelation became a symbol of the new openness in our family relationships. Instead of hiding it in a downtown garage, I now parked it in my parents' driveway during family gatherings, where it served as a reminder that success can take many forms and that families can learn to support each other's unconventional choices. The Christmas morning that had begun with shocked silence and accusations had ultimately resulted in stronger family bonds and a clearer understanding of each other's values and motivations. Sometimes the most difficult revelations create opportunities for the most meaningful growth. 6 months after that Christmas morning revelation, I was sitting in the conference room of Miller Logistics' new downtown Portland headquarters, looking out at the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows that I never could have imagined affording when I first started the company. The Portland Business Journal feature had been published 3 months earlier, and the response had exceeded even my most optimistic projections. The article, titled "Building Bridges: How One Family Learned to Celebrate Unconventional Success," had struck a chord with readers far beyond the Portland business community. The story had been picked up by national publications, and I had received inquiries from potential clients as far away as Chicago and Miami. More importantly, the positive framing of our family's journey had opened doors to speaking opportunities at entrepreneurship conferences and business schools, where I found myself sharing the stage with established industry leaders who wanted to understand how Miller Logistics had achieved such rapid growth while maintaining strong ethical standards and employee satisfaction. The new office space was a far cry from the converted warehouse where I had started the company 5 years earlier. Alex Chen and I had decided that our success warranted a professional headquarters that could accommodate our growing staff and provide a suitable environment for meeting with the major clients who were increasingly interested in our services. The space featured a modern design that balanced functionality with aesthetic appeal, including an employee break room that would have made some tech companies envious, and a conference room equipped with the latest video conferencing technology for managing our expanding network of warehouse facilities. But what struck me most about our new environment wasn't the upgraded furniture or the impressive city views. It was the photographs displayed throughout the office space, including several pictures from family gatherings where I was no longer hiding in the background or making excuses for early departures. There was a photo from Tyler's graduation party, where I had arrived in the Tesla and stayed for the entire celebration, contributing to conversations about business and entrepreneurship instead of deflecting questions about my own activities. Another picture showed our entire family at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for Miller Logistics' 4th warehouse facility, where my parents had beamed with pride as I spoke to the assembled crowd of employees, clients, and local business leaders. The transformation in our family dynamics had been more profound than I had anticipated. Rachel and I now talked regularly about business strategy and professional challenges, and she had become one of my most trusted advisors when it came to marketing and brand development. Her experience in corporate communications had proven invaluable, as Miller Logistics navigated the transition from a private operation to a more public-facing company. Mark had introduced me to several potential investors who were interested in funding our expansion into new markets, though I had ultimately decided to maintain full ownership of the company rather than dilute my equity stake. Tyler had surprised everyone by expressing serious interest in joining Miller Logistics after completing his computer science degree. His technical skills were exactly what we needed to develop the proprietary inventory management software that would allow us to scale our operations more efficiently. What had started as casual conversations about the business had evolved into detailed discussions about system architecture and database optimization, and I found myself looking forward to the possibility of working alongside my younger brother, who had always impressed me with his analytical thinking and creative problem-solving abilities. My parents had perhaps undergone the most significant adjustment of anyone in the family. Bob had retired from his longtime position at the insurance company 6 months earlier than originally planned, partly because he wanted to spend more time understanding the business that his daughter had built, and partly because he was eager to contribute his decades of experience in risk management and customer service to Miller Logistics' continued growth. Linda had become the unofficial family historian, documenting our journey from deception and misunderstanding to open communication and mutual support through carefully curated photo albums and written reflections that captured both the challenges and the triumphs of our transformation. The coffee shop that had served as my cover story for 5 years had become something entirely different. Instead of a simple front operation designed to provide plausible income documentation, Grind Coffee had evolved into a genuine community gathering place that hosted monthly networking events for Portland's small business owners and entrepreneurs. I had hired a dedicated manager to handle the day-to-day operations, but I still spent several hours each week working behind the counter, partly because I enjoyed the direct customer interaction, and partly because it kept me connected to the grassroots entrepreneurial community that had inspired my initial business development. The financial transformation that had accompanied my public recognition was substantial but manageable. My net worth had increased significantly due to both the continued growth of Miller Logistics and the appreciation of my investment portfolio. But more importantly, I had learned to use my wealth in ways that aligned with my values and long-term goals. I had established a scholarship fund for first-generation college students interested in pursuing entrepreneurship, and I had begun angel investing in startups founded by women and underrepresented minorities, who faced some of the same credibility challenges that I had navigated during Miller Logistics' early development. The house I had purchased in Northwest Portland was comfortable and well-appointed without being ostentatious. It featured a home office where I could work when I didn't want to commute downtown, a guest room that had become a regular destination for family members visiting from out of town, and a garage that could accommodate both the Tesla and the pickup truck I had bought for occasions when I needed to transport equipment or supplies for the business. The neighborhood was populated with other professionals and small business owners who valued privacy and community in equal measure, and I had found myself developing genuine friendships with people who knew about my success but didn't treat me differently because of it. The speaking engagements that had resulted from the Portland Business Journal article had become one of the most rewarding aspects of my new public profile. Universities and business organizations regularly invited me to discuss topics ranging from logistics industry trends to family communication strategies, and I found that sharing my story helped other entrepreneurs who were struggling with similar challenges around privacy, family expectations, and authentic success. The audiences were consistently engaged by the practical business lessons embedded in what many people saw primarily as a human interest story, and I had received hundreds of emails from individuals who had been inspired to pursue their own entrepreneurial ventures or to have more honest conversations with their families about their goals and achievements. One particular speaking engagement had stood out from the others. Portland State University, the same institution where I had started and abandoned my business degree program, had invited me to deliver the keynote address at their annual entrepreneurship conference. Standing at the podium in the same building where I had once sat through lectures about theoretical business models, I had the opportunity to share practical insights drawn from years of actually building and managing a successful operation. The audience included current students who were wrestling with decisions about whether to continue their formal education or pursue immediate business opportunities, and I found myself offering the kind of nuanced guidance that I wished had been available to me when I was making similar choices. The most meaningful part of that presentation had been the question and answer session, where a young woman had asked about the psychological challenges of maintaining privacy while building a business. Her question revealed that she was facing some of the same family pressure and expectation management issues that had driven my own decisions about secrecy and disclosure. I was able to share specific strategies for setting boundaries while maintaining relationships, and her follow-up questions suggested that our conversation had provided genuine value for her own entrepreneurial planning. After the presentation, several faculty members had approached me about the possibility of developing a case study based on Miller Logistics that could be used in their operations management and family business courses. The idea of having my company's development become part of the curriculum at the university where I had once struggled with theoretical concepts was both gratifying and amusing. It represented a complete reversal of the traditional academic to practical progression that most business education assumes. The relationship between Miller Logistics and our client base had also evolved significantly since the media attention. Companies that had previously viewed us as a competent but unremarkable service provider were now eager to deepen their partnerships and explore new opportunities for collaboration. Several major outdoor gear manufacturers had approached us about developing exclusive fulfillment arrangements that would allow them to offer faster shipping times and more flexible inventory management to their customers. The revenue growth that had resulted from these expanded relationships had enabled us to invest in additional automation technology and employee development programs that positioned Miller Logistics as an industry leader rather than simply a reliable vendor. The employee satisfaction surveys that we conducted quarterly had shown consistent improvement since the public recognition of our success. Team members reported feeling more pride in their work and greater confidence in the company's long-term stability and growth prospects. We had been able to implement profit-sharing programs and enhanced benefits packages that reflected our improved financial position, and our voluntary turnover rate had dropped to less than 5% annually, which was exceptional for the logistics industry. The combination of competitive compensation, positive work environment, and clear advancement opportunities had made Miller Logistics an employer of choice for talented professionals throughout the Pacific Northwest. Alex Chen had been promoted to Chief Operating Officer, a title that better reflected his contributions to the company's strategic development and day-to-day management. His leadership had been instrumental in managing our expansion, while maintaining the quality standards and customer service levels that had differentiated Miller Logistics from larger, more impersonal competitors. Together, we had developed a 5-year growth plan that included potential expansion into California and Arizona markets, pending completion of feasibility studies and identification of suitable warehouse facilities. The personal relationships that had been most affected by my revelation continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Rachel and Mark had become regular dinner guests at my new house, and our conversations had shifted from the superficial updates that had characterized our previous interactions to substantive discussions about business strategy, financial planning, and long-term career goals. Rachel had confided that witnessing my success had inspired her to consider starting her own consulting firm rather than continuing to climb the corporate ladder at her current company. Mark had begun exploring opportunities to leave his investment banking position to join a smaller firm that focused on providing financial services to entrepreneurs and family-owned businesses. Tyler's relationship with Stephanie had become more serious, and I had found myself serving as an informal mentor as he navigated questions about career choices and financial planning. His interest in joining Miller Logistics had evolved into concrete discussions about equity participation and long-term succession planning, conversations that would have been impossible when my business success was hidden from my family. The possibility of building Miller Logistics into a genuine family enterprise was becoming more realistic, as Tyler demonstrated both the technical skills and the business acumen that would be required for senior leadership roles. My parents had embraced their new roles as supporters and advisors, with enthusiasm that sometimes bordered on overcompensation for their earlier skepticism about my entrepreneurial ambitions. Bob had become a regular presence at Miller Logistics events, where his decades of customer service experience provided valuable insights for our account management teams. Linda had taken on the unofficial role of family communications coordinator, ensuring that everyone stayed informed about business developments and family milestones through carefully crafted email updates that balanced professional achievements with personal news. The Christmas gathering that year had been markedly different from the tension-filled morning when my Tesla had first shattered our family's assumptions about my financial situation. Instead of the awkward gift exchanges and forced conversations that had characterized previous holidays, we had spent the day touring Miller Logistics' newest warehouse facility and discussing expansion plans over a catered dinner in the company's conference room. The symbolism of celebrating Christmas at my business headquarters rather than hiding my success from my family felt like a powerful representation of how fundamentally our relationships had changed. The media attention that had initially seemed like a threat to my privacy had ultimately created opportunities for meaningful recognition and professional development that I never could have achieved while maintaining my elaborate deception. Industry publications regularly sought my insights on logistics trends and small business management strategies, and I had been invited to join the advisory boards of several Portland area business organizations. The visibility had also attracted the attention of potential acquisition partners, though I had declined all offers to sell Miller Logistics, preferring to maintain control over the company's direction and values. The investment portfolio that had grown alongside Miller Logistics' success had reached levels that provided genuine financial security for not just me but potentially for my entire extended family. I had established trust funds for any future children that my siblings might have, and I had begun discussions with financial advisors about developing a comprehensive estate plan that would ensure Miller Logistics could continue operating successfully regardless of what happened to me personally. The responsibility that came with significant wealth was something I had never fully considered during the early years, when I was focused primarily on building the business and protecting my privacy. The Tesla that had started this entire journey remained my primary vehicle, though I had learned to drive it without the anxiety that had previously accompanied any risk of being seen by family members or acquaintances. The car had become a symbol of the authentic success that I no longer felt the need to hide. And I found myself enjoying the conversations that it sometimes sparked with other entrepreneurs and business owners who were curious about electric vehicle technology and environmental sustainability. Looking back on the 5 years of deception that had preceded my family's discovery of my success, I felt a complex mixture of regret and gratitude. The secrecy had undoubtedly created unnecessary stress and distance in my most important relationships. But it had also provided the psychological space that I needed to build something significant, without the weight of others' expectations or doubts. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about the importance of authentic communication, and the dangers of allowing assumptions to substitute for honest conversation. The transformation of our family dynamics had also influenced my approach to business leadership and employee management. I had implemented regular one-on-one meetings with all senior staff members to ensure that important information was shared openly, and that individual career goals were understood and supported. The culture of transparency and mutual respect that characterized Miller Logistics' internal operations was directly influenced by the lessons I had learned about the costs of secrecy and miscommunication in personal relationships. The speaking opportunities that continued to arise from my story had evolved beyond simple business presentations to include discussions about family communication, generational differences in approaches to success, and the psychological challenges of entrepreneurship. Audiences consistently responded to the practical insights embedded in what many viewed primarily as an inspirational narrative, and I had begun developing materials for a potential book that would explore these themes in greater depth. The coffee shop continued to serve as a connection point between my business success and my community roots. The monthly networking events had grown into a genuine resource for Portland's small business community, and several successful partnerships had emerged from connections made during these informal gatherings. The space had become a symbol of the values that I wanted Miller Logistics to represent: accessibility, community support, and authentic relationship building. As I sat in my new office overlooking the city where I had built something significant while learning important lessons about family, communication, and authentic success, I felt grateful for the unexpected Christmas morning revelation that had forced me to confront the limitations of secrecy and embrace the possibilities of honest relationships. The Tesla in the driveway had been the key that unlocked not just my family's understanding of my achievements, but my own understanding of what success truly meant when it was shared with the people who mattered most. The journey from deception to transparency had been more challenging and more rewarding than I could have anticipated. It had required courage to be vulnerable, wisdom to navigate complex family dynamics, and humility to acknowledge the ways that my choices had affected others. But it had also created opportunities for deeper relationships, more meaningful success, and a clearer understanding of the values that would guide my future decisions. The story that had begun with a simple mistake in parking had evolved into a comprehensive transformation of how I understood family, success, and the importance of living authentically. The Tesla would always remind me of that Christmas morning when everything changed, but more importantly, it would represent the ongoing commitment to honesty and openness that had made all subsequent success more meaningful and more sustainable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.